recordar o acordarse? The world may never know. The world may never remember. Hola, hola mis amores, soy Madison y bienvenidos a mi canal Everyday Español. As you saw at the beginning of the video, to remember, recordar or acordarse. Both of these verbs cause a lot of confusion for a lot of Spanish learners because they both mean to remember. So when do you use one over the other? There are some very slight differences in when you would use recordar versus acordarse. So let's dive into some of those differences today. Before we get into today's lesson, do not forget to download the Unacademy app so you guys can get quick hitter Spanish lessons on the go anywhere in the palm of your hand. A simple way to put this and to think about it is to think about the verb recordar as the English equivalent to recall. And you want to think of the verb acordarse with the English equivalent of to remember. Now, if you were to ask an English speaker what's the difference between recall and remember, they might look at you like they kind of mean the same thing. And that's exactly how these verbs work as well. So today we're going to dive into exactly when you would use one over the other. So in this first section, let's talk about recordar using examples. This verb is pretty straightforward because there's no reflexive, there's nothing funky about it. It is a regular AR verb. It follows the very simple structure of subject plus verb plus object. Remember, we are using recordar as more to recall. So let's look at some examples of using recordar as to recall. In the first example I have, yo recuerdo la fecha del cumpleaños de mi mamá. I remember the date of my mom's birthday. Or, as we said, we're trying to use recordar with recall. We could say, I recall the date of my mother's birthday, which might sound a little bit weirder to us in English, but it really does mean remember. But if it helps you think about it by using it as to recall, that's one way to look at it. Another example is, ella recuerda su primer viaje a España. She remembers her first trip to Spain. Or she recalls her first trip to Spain. Notice how the verb recordar is pretty straightforward, just like the English translation of to remember / to recall. Now let's look on the other hand, acordarse. This is a reflexive verb, and a lot of people are like, oh no, reflexives. I'm telling you, it's okay. We're gonna get you through it. But acordarse, a little bit different because they are dealing with some reflexive, and so you're going to need that reflexive pronoun in front. Another huge thing about the verb acordarse is that it is always followed by the preposition de. So the structure of this is reflexive pronoun, the verb acordar plus de plus the thing you're remembering. So reflexive pronoun plus conjugated verb of acordar plus de, that preposition has to be there, plus the thing you're remembering, which is a little bit more complex than the structure of the verb recordar. For example, me acuerdo de la película que vimos la semana pasada. Me acuerdo de la película que vimos la semana pasada. I remember the movie we watched last weekend. Because acordarse has a reflexive with it. If you haven't seen my video on reflexives, check it out. But basically, it's saying that the person doing the action is the one receiving the effects of it. It's like a mirror. Like, nobody else is making them get up or making them do X, Y, and Z. That's kind of how I look at reflexive verbs. So this one, when I'm thinking about acordarse, I'm thinking, oh, I remember. Like, all of a sudden, when you're like thinking, like, oh my gosh, I forgot something. And then out of nowhere, no prompt, no suggestion or anything, you remember. That's kind of how I see acordarse. Now, it might not always be like that, but if I'm just thinking about the structure and how typically reflexive verbs kind of work, that's how it kind of comes off, the vibe it gives off, I guess. Another example, nos acordamos de la reunión a las 3. Nos acordamos de la reunión a las 3. We remembered the meeting at 3 p.m. Do not, and I repeat, do not forget the preposition de when you are using the verb acordarse. It is essential if you are using this verb. Do you guys remember what we're gonna do now? We're gonna take a quick pause and we're gonna jump on the Unacademy app so we do not forget how to do this. Let's go. Okay, complete the sentence. The shirt is new. La camisa es nueva. Match the following. Mi camisa verde, mi vestido nuevo. Bien. My pink dress is new. Mi vestido rosado es nuevo. My sweater is new. Mi suéter es nuevo. Translate the sentence. Mi hermana tiene una camisa nueva. Okay, match the following. Viejo, old, nuevo, new. Mi vestido viejo, my old dress. My mother has a pair of old boots. Mi madre tiene my madre tiene unas botas viejas. Botas nuevas, pantalones viejos, vestido nuevo, camisa vieja. Wonderful. All right, you guys, let's jump back into our lesson on remembering. But don't you forget, so you remember to download that Unacademy app so you guys can keep on practicing. Let's go into some common mistakes that I typically see with the verb recordar and acordarse when people are trying to reconcile the differences in the structures and how to use them. A big thing is that people confuse or mix up or combine the structure, like sentence structure of recordar y acordarse. So they'll take some of the sentence structures from acordarse, they'll put a reflexive pronoun in front of recordar, and then they'll put the day, and it's just, it makes sense as to why the confusion would be there, but I'm going to point out some very common mistakes so you don't make them. Let's look at a couple examples. This first example is incorrect. I'm going to point that out now, so in case you zoned out for whatever reason and you join back, you're like, oh, that's the right way. This is not the right way to do it. A lot of times I see this common mistake. Me recuerdo de la fecha. This is not correct at all. So, as you can see in the structure, it took the me from the reflexive acordarse, and it took the day that is needed with the verb acordarse, but it didn't use the word acordarse at all. It used recordar. So how do I fix this? You could use it in one of two ways. Which verb do you want to use? You can really choose. You could say, me acuerdo de la fecha, or if you're using the verb recordar, you could say, recuerdo la fecha. I remember the date. Let's move on to our next section by talking about some more complex sentence structures in which you would be using the verb recordar y acordarse at the same time. So far, if you've picked up on anything, they're kind of interchangeable, but what's not interchangeable is their structure, is their formation. A lot of times I like to tell my students to think of recordar as to recall y acordarse as to remember, but realistically, they're kind of the same, but we just cannot mix up the structure formation of them. So let's look at a couple complex sentence structures and in which you could use both. Yo recuerdo lo que me dijiste ayer, pero no me acuerdo de los detalles. I remember what you told me yesterday, but I don't remember the details. Our next complex sentence structure. No te acuerdas de mí, pero yo sí recuerdo de nuestro primer encuentro. You don't remember me, but I remember our first encounter. All right, guys, this next one is for you guys, my viewers, to practice at home. Are you going to use recordar or acordarse? I want you guys to write your answers in the comment section below. And if you're like, wait, what do you mean I have to choose? I thought you said you can kind of just use whichever one you want. I did say that. So what I want you guys to do, I'm going to give you a sentence and a blank. I want you to use context clues. Is there a reflexive in the front? Is there the day there? To figure out, am I going to use recordar or acordarse? Vámonos. Número 1. Yo, la lección de la semana pasada. Número 2. Te, blank, de lo que hablamos ayer. Número 3. Ella, blank, bien, ese día especial. Y finalmente, número 4. Nosotros, blank, los detalles del viaje. All right, pause the video here. Think about it. I will reveal the answers, but I genuinely want you guys to practice writing them and putting them in the comments, but I'm going to reveal the answers so you're not left hanging if you're correct or not. For número 1, I would use recuerdo la lección de la semana pasada. There's no reflexive pronoun in front, and there's no de in there. So that cues me into, all right, I'm going to use a form of the verb recordar. Número 2, te acuerdas de lo que hablamos ayer. How do I know that? It has a reflexive pronoun in the front, and then afterward it's followed by a de. Número 3, ella recuerda ese día especial. Y finalmente, número 4, nos acordamos de los detalles del viaje. How did you guys do? where your answer is correct. One last final point to get this across. I mentioned in the middle of this video that because acordarse is reflective, it's making me think, okay, it's more personal, they're remembering it on their own. Whereas recordar is more direct. But again, you can use either one, but following the trend or the tendencies, the patterns of Spanish and how we use reflexive verbs, acordarse is kind of giving off it's a personal thing that I remembered on my own, kind of. These tiny differences can really subtly change the tone or the message that you're giving across to somebody. But again, all in all, they both mean to remember. Just what are you trying to communicate? More recall or more remember? But they're kind of equal. Just do not mess up that sentence structure. All right, mis amores, that is it for today. You have successfully mastered recordar versus acordarse. I hope this made you guys feel a little bit more confident in which one to use. And like I said, the confidence, you should have it because now you know it's not one over the other. It's kind of pick one you want to use and get that structure down correctly. You guys know what to do. Hit that notification button so you never miss another video with me, Profe Madison. I hope you guys join me next time on Everyday Español. Subscribe to my channel and join mi comunidad. Hasta luego.